just going to cover the attestation process, which I mentioned earlier, before we get into looking at what the contract manager will look at on the files and how to avoid common errors that are made. So the attestation process, mentioned this earlier, it's an internal process. It's not one that the legal aid agency will talk to you about. Has anyone heard about it? No. So this is a paper-based exercise. The LAA are really big on this at the moment. It's only been around for about a year, and it's the most comprehensive risk assessment process that was developed in my almost 17 years there. Contract manager will be told we're having a meeting in a few weeks' time. These two providers have been picked for you, and we now want you to compile a risk assessment report on that provider. And if you turn to page 20, no, sorry, 24. Just starting about a third of the way down, all the areas that are covered in that report are things like a brief history of the firm, whether you're sole trader, partnership, there's been a change in status, change in key personnel, whether there's been any mergers or demergers, what contracts you hold, what your fund take figures are they going up or down, are they going up for LGFS, down for AGFS, a summary of all contract and audit activity over the last 12 months, which offices have been visited, which categories of law have been looked at, what was the result of those. All the things that are covered on the CM visit, so your supervision, indemnity insurance, quality standard, has that all been checked? An analysis of your accounts to look at things like turnover, your liquidity, so that's your net current assets minus your current liabilities. If you were to go bust tomorrow, could you meet all of your liabilities that are outstanding? Look at your profit. And that will be set aside the liabilities that you've got to the LAA. So what the LAA are interested in there is what is the financial risk of this firm, how strong are they financially, and what is our liability or the liabilities of that firm to the LAA. Details of any sanctions will be noted. The LAA also has an internal risk log. If you as a provider are deemed to pose a risk, financial, to access or to the LAA's reputation, you will go on that risk log, and if you're deemed to be a high enough risk, a report will go to senior management every month. If you've been on there for any reason, that will go in the report, plus how it's been managed. Key contract performance areas will go in, and note whether there's been an independent review of your firm. If your contract manager's been in post for more than 3 years, that's a civil service thing. And it's supposed to protect the integrity of the relationship with somebody independent will have a meaningful interaction with you at least once every 3 years. And finally, and perhaps most interesting, there'll be a summary, and the contract manager will put their view of you as a firm, what you like, are you helpful, do you try your hardest, are you obstructive, and also the contract manager's perception of what you, the firm, think of the LAA. So once that report's been compiled, contract manager will present to his peers, area contract manager and a member of the national contract manager team, or perhaps John Sorodka, head of contract management, will be there. 10-minute presentation followed by a 10-15 minute discussion of all the risks associated with you, the firm, and whether or not they're being managed appropriately. The outcome to that is you can fail, you can pass with corrective action, or you can pass. Unless you pass with no corrective action, you are likely to receive further activity. And the first you'll know about it is your contract manager will be in touch and say, I'm going to do a peer review, or I'm going to be looking at this area of your files. And they won't necessarily refer to the attestation process because it's an internal process. But they will be reporting back to senior management about you and whether whatever processes they're putting you through are mitigating the risks that have obviously been decided that there are. It's worth noting for those of you that are under £1 million, because like I say, this is new, the LAA like it, and already they're starting to encourage contract managers to think about all of the things on the attestation process when planning for every contract manager visit, and hoping that those thought processes are going to influence how they plan for each and every visit. So whilst you might not go through attestation, what will happen as part of this process will probably start to affect how visits are designed over the next year or two. So I thought it was worth just sharing for 5 minutes so you got a little bit of an insight into what's going on at the LAA. Okay, so now we come on to the CM visit and the various areas that your CM will be looking at on your files. and what common errors there are. So we'll start with the magistrates court. So one thing we've mentioned is the category 2 fees. I should mention that pages 26 to 42 in your handout pretty much has all the detail of what we're going to cover in this section. And it's worth, while we're considering category 2 fees, just looking at the section on page 27, the bottom half of page 27. So your category 2 field, if it goes to trial, obviously you're covered, no problem. But what if it's discontinued? What if it's a cracked trial? You need to evidence preparation on the file. And at the start of this year, this guidance is quite an old point of principle, was reissued to contract managers. It's point of principle CRIM 41, and it details exactly what you need to keep on your file to claim the category 2 fee if the trial hasn't proceeded. And that is, it should be available, proportionate to the charges to be tried, proof from the defendant dealing with each of the points to prove, observations and analysis of the prosecution evidence, consideration of disclosure issues, and consideration of the identification of defence witnesses and at least attempts to contact them. So all those 4 things your contract manager should be on the lookout for if you've claimed a category 2 fee and it hasn't gone to trial. Okay.
If you have a case, I had one of these recently, where a client phones up on a Sunday night and says, I've got a trial tomorrow. And you say, well, I'll see you at court in the morning then. If you are, well, no, sorry, it wasn't a Sunday, it was a particular example was a Wednesday afternoon,
yeah.
Trial on Thursday. I couldn't see him on the Wednesday. I got the disclosure from the Crown Prosecution Service. I had a look at it that night. Obviously, I couldn't get him to sign anything until the next day, so I couldn't apply for legal aid. And then it cracked on the day of the trial. But I'd done preparation, but I couldn't claim for that under legal aid because it was prior to the application being made.
Right, okay.
But I mean, that would still count, would it, as preparation, or would it?
If you've got everything that I just mentioned that's on that list, or you've given, I mean, the clause actually says proportionate to the charges being tried, and I guess it would also be proportionate to the amount of time that you've got. But if you've got all of those things on there, yes. You might think that the auditors are interested in knocking your category 2s down to category 1s, but the other angle is if you've claimed a category 1 and that drops into a higher standard fee, but should have claimed a category 2, but that if it was claimed at category 2 it would have been a lower standard fee. The contract managers will also be on the lookout for that. So it is possible to overclaim in a file by going down a category rather than up. So we talked about your magistrates fee profiles before. A high percentage of lower standard fees would lead perhaps to an indication to look more closely at case splitting. So that's separate matters in the police station, series of offences in the magistrates court. A series of offences, I'm sure you've all probably had files selected for that. It's one of the big areas and has been for a while now. The 2 clauses in the contract, the main 2 clauses are 1068, which is your 3 tests for series of offences, and 1069, breach proceedings. There's been an interesting development with the breach proceeding side of things. While I was there, it wasn't really applied consistently. We used to interpret breach proceedings as you shouldn't claim a separate matter, whether it's got anything or not to do with another matter, if that hearing is at the same time as another matter at court. The wording in the contract is vague. It actually says matters before the court. And I think over the last kind of year or two, somebody somewhere has sort of said, well, hang on a minute, before the court just means there's another court case ongoing, wherever it may be in the country at the same time. And that's started to seep through, and there's been a more consistent message over the last few months. The LAA now seems to be applying consistently the idea that if there's any other matter at court, even if the hearing doesn't touch with your breach proceeding, you cannot claim a separate fee for that breach proceeding.
That's not gone to a point of principle, though, has it? Because the LAA are frightened about it, because they know that if it did, they'd probably go against them. Because if you have proceedings in one court on one day, and then there are breach proceedings in another county, that's why they won't go for a point of principle, and I know why they won't go for a point of principle.
Well, I mean, it's your decision as a provider if you want to take something to a point of principle. You have to go through informal reconsideration, appeal to the independent cost
adjudicator. The contract manager, in those circumstances, used to back down because they never wanted it to go to a point of principle. Because once it's there, like in relation to trial preparation, we go, there you are. That's why they go and fight that.
I personally think it's contentious, definitely. I don't know if anybody's appealed it as far as an independent cost adjudicator. I've not heard that they have. I think most firms just tend to back down and think they'll just accept it. The legal aid agency seems to be relying on a clause in CBAM which says if there are no other matters at court, then you can have a separate fee. But that doesn't necessarily follow if there are not matters at court, you can't have a standard fee. And there's also the point that CBAM was written in 2013. CBAM isn't the contract, and the contract came out in 2010. So I would say if this is cropping up with you, you want to give serious consideration as to whether or not you want to appeal it.
Just in respect of different providers, for example, gone to court, picked up a duty breach proceedings, but the next year discovered that the client has legally representation with another firm for a separate matter. He's guilty to breach, it's all wrapped over goes over to a trial and sentence for breach. So two firms representing the same client.
I think if you've undertaken that breach proceeding in good faith and weren't aware, or for whatever reason it wasn't passed over to the firm if it was justified, then they couldn't stop you claiming the fee. Nor is it likely that they would ever make the connection. They're not going to look at your firm's data and the other firm's data and make that connection that there was two matters either. So it's probably a moot point.
So just to be clear, if you've got a client before the court today for an assault and they've dealt with that assault, but you're aware, although it's not before the court today, that they have got the breach proceeding for breach of their, I don't know, curfew order coming up next week, which is their contested hearing. The way the LAA is interpreting that is that's all one court cost, is it?
Yes.
Gosh.
Yes. Although, again, it opens up that subjectivity. If you're saying the non-breach matter was dealt with today, then you could argue that if it's been dealt with, by the time the breach comes around, the matter isn't, or the matters aren't before the court. It opens a whole can of worms, I think.
So I mean, could you get round it just by not applying for legal aid until tomorrow for the other matter?
I don't.
Yeah, but it's
it is a way around it, yeah.
It's still technically before the court today if you're using the really wide definition before the court.
And it just highlights the real difficulties. It depends whether you want to have the battle or whether you're just prepared to say it's not worth it and we now know what the LAA are doing and we'll toe the line. If you are thinking that you might be a bit more combative about this, I would suggest that you get in touch with your contract manager now and ask them for kind of rules, or in this scenario, what is the case. It's much easier to do it before you're having that row facing a contract notice and recoupments and afterwards. But it's difficult for me to give you absolute guidance because this is seemingly a new interpretation. It's not something that's been applied consistently by all contract managers while in my time there, and it's something that's completely subjective, so different contract managers may be at different points in the cycle for how they're going to deal with that. But I think they're probably going to deal with it inconsistently.
The other thing while we're on this is series of offences. You've got a theft, you've got a theft, you've got a theft, you've got a theft, they're all similar. You've got another theft with an assault. Theft is similar to the other ones, the assault is completely different.
Yes.
But that theft and assault are charged at the same time, even though they're nothing to do.
If it's charged at the same time, then...
But does that then form a series with all of the other thefts?
I would say that there's a grey area when it comes to series of offences. I would say as a contract manager, on that basic fact, they would probably argue that yes, that's a series of offences. But you kind of have to see the minutiae, the details of the cases, to see whether there's something that genuinely sets that apart.
Simply because, so if they charged a theft, a theft, a theft, a theft, and assault, that would definitely be a separate court cost.
Yes.
But
the fact that it's charged at the same time.
Because they've charged, there's three separate ones, and then there's this one at the end which is an assault, where they've also charged a theft, which got nothing to do with each other.
I think it comes down to can you justify that the theft and assault, which is one matter, is materially different to the three thefts and requires different legal advice. It's not founded on the same facts as the...
No, assault one was.
Yeah. Well, I mean, it comes down to your justification in the file, I think. And it is a grey area, and it's one you have a debate over, so you kind of have to choose, do you want to have that debate with your contract manager, and have you got the kind of courage of your convictions to think, well, I think I can justify this, so I'm gonna do it.
Can I just say, I recently had a bit before Christmas, and I put that question to the contract manager, and his view, and I have it in an email, is no, he's not aware of the series of offences and one single claim it separately,
Right.
each one.
Good, you've got that in writing.
I'm not in writing,
Save
but I'm
it.
still reluctant to do that.
It's wrong, yeah.
It's wrong.
It is wrong.
Yeah, we took some advice on this point about to what degree can you rely on an email from a contract manager, because we had a scenario in London whereby one of the senior contract managers, I think we talked to you about this, I think we were part of the email exchange, had said something in writing in an email which was materially wrong, and the question was, well, can I rely on it? And I asked one of my other colleagues, Matthew, who used to be the senior legal advisor at the LSC, and he said, actually no, what's in a tender and what's in a contract will trump anything that a contract manager says if legal action is taken. So his advice was that yes, whilst the contract manager was completely wrong and a complaint could be made, still would not be able to, if it actually came to it, you know, be able to use that to trump anything that's in a contract.
Even though they're an agent of the contracting party and therefore presumably able to modify the contract on behalf of that party.
Well, what happened in that case is the people in the commissioning team, the Bravo portal, said, "We're sorry, what the contract manager said. The contract manager's wrong. These are the rules." I mean, I gave you an example earlier where I've used that kind of approach to get my clients out of trouble. But when it's something which is a bit more fundamental, can you remember what the precise scenario was?
No. I remember it.
Yeah, it was something really fundamental. Like, for example, that was it. It was splitting an SQM. It was basically saying, okay, we can split this SQM between different providers, and you know that's so completely not true. And this contract manager's been there for about 35 years, and I don't know what he was thinking.
Yeah.
It's so obvious the answer, but he'd put that in writing, and the provider initially wanted to rely on it and not get an SQM audit.
Although there is an interesting angle that if you are relying on advice from someone who works for the LAA and that proves to be wrong, and then you suffer a financial loss because of that, you can make a claim for maladministration. I think it's called an ex gratia payment. You just write to your contract manager and said, well, this is the loss that I've suffered, this is the advice I've got in writing. You know, I want to claim the money back for maladministration. The flip side of your higher standard fee, lower standard fee ratio, which we touched on before, is if you have a higher percentage of higher standard fees, the contract manager may want to look at whether or not you're overworking the cases to try to claim the higher fee. The LAA are at a disadvantage when it comes to this because they don't know with your higher standard fees, because you record the fee and not the profit costs, whether you're 10 or 20 quid over the limit or you're kind of 100, 200, 300 pounds into the limit. So what your contract manager do is select a number of higher standard fees, and the first one they'll go for is your CRIM 11, and to have a look at your core costs and to see which of those files are just over the limit. If a lot of them are just over the limit, that will send the alarm bells ringing a little bit higher. Your contract manager will not do a line-by-line assessment of those files. They're not trained to do it, they haven't got the time to do it. But what they will do is what we used to sort of call the weight test. So to look at a file, and does this file look like it's the highest standard fee? You know, how many hours attendance have they claimed? 10. What contributes to that? There's supposed to be 4 attendance notes on there. 2 of them are 3 hours each. Let's see if we can find those attendance notes. Let's read the ones that are 3 hours long. Does it sound to us reasonable to spend 3 hours on that attendance? If the answer to those questions are no, what you'll do is say, I'm going to take these files away, take them to the Nottingham office where we've got the kind of crime file specialists, and I am going to get them to do a line-by-line assessment, and I'm going to see if they knock you down from a higher standard fee to a lower standard fee. If that happens, you can then expect either a targeted file review on all your higher standard fees, send them down to Nottingham, or a cost compliance audit, where a sample of your higher standard fees will be looked at. Now obviously, if a number of those get knocked from higher to lower standard fees, quite a big jump in fee that can lead to quite a high percentage of extrapolation. So my advice to you is when you're doing your higher standard fees, make sure somebody is checking them. Maybe it's a supervisor, maybe you trust your fee earners, you get your fee earners to do this. If it is just over the limit, make sure that all the attendance notes are on there, If there are lengthy attendances, make sure you're happy that the attendance note justifies the amount of time. So it will pass that kind of first look, that sense check that your contract manager is doing. Magistrates Court, evidence of client declaration. So you're applying CRIM 14s online now. You have to keep client declaration. Lots and lots of client declarations I saw before I left weren't being signed and dated by the solicitor. All the boxes have to be signed correctly. If not, contract manager will void your file. If they find one or more of these, you're likely to lead to a contract notice, and they're likely to say, we want you to self-review all of the files affected by this, i.e. all of your magistrates court files. So perhaps the self-review, the corrective action element, is more punitive than the financial element to that. And
so does it have to be a solicitor who signs the form, or can the clerk sign?
I'm not sure what it says on the form. Is it the solicitor? I think it is a solicitor. It is. And the last area sounds quite obvious, but you've used the correct code. So particularly designated, non-designated. I don't know. Is anybody in a non-designated area here? Or is it all designated? You're in a so if you're in designated, it's always the same codes. If you're in a non-designated area, a rural area, then you obviously claim dependent on where the location of the court is. Still see an awful lot of errors picked up from those clients claiming the wrong type of fee. IMVA claims, advice and assistance. Most commonly these are benefit fraud cases. You must have a CRIM 1 and CRIM 2 on file, must be fully completed and signed and dated. Must have the capital section. You must probably best not to strike it through, because you might get into an argument with the contract manager about you address that properly. Advice is always to put zeros and nils in there where you've got a nil capital client. You need to be keeping evidence of means. A lot of crime providers fall foul of this because they think it's benefit fraud, they're on benefits, it's obvious. Unless there's an official document within your pack somewhere from the job centre saying they're entitled to the passporting benefit, then you will need to get that evidence. You can ring the job centre in the presence of your client, and so long as you make a note of the person you spoke to, the phone number you rang, the date and the time, then that will be accepted as evidence. If your client hasn't got
We've had it with exactly this position recently. We had backdated letter to say they were in CBSA and that was sufficient. We had a conversation with the job centre and that was sufficient. The bank statements with payments coming in with ESA noted large bank next, that's not sufficient.
bank statements aren't, because for ESA to passport it has to be income related, not contributions based, and the bank statement doesn't say that. So you can only rely on bank statements for universal credit or income support. The phone call to the job centre, so long as you put the date, the time, the person you've spoken to, that should be accepted.
That will take ages. Can you do an application online for legal aid that you don't intend to submit, which will then come up saying you are passport capable, and take a screenshot of that to stick it on the file?
I don't know.
That's the right system.
Yeah, I mean, it sounds...
That's quick. That would take you 5 minutes.
No, because the CRIM 1 and 2 is income-based ESA, whereas the legal aid application is just simple ESA. It's simpler than...
right, okay, yeah.
With JSA, they will need support.
I think it says ESA, income-related ESA and income-related JSA. This was the actual specific words they wanted us to have on a letter from job centre.
Is that why they rejected the letter that you got retrospective on? Because it didn't say income
We
related?
got one with the correct way of mentioned, but it was just jumping through
Yeah.
to get the actual physical evidence.
Yeah, but they're wrong, in my opinion, to not have allowed a telephone call, providing you said, spoke to X on this date, at this time, on this phone number, and they confirmed it was income related. Yeah, I think you'd have had a good chance to make representations about that. The other areas that are interested in is scope and sufficient benefit. If it's benefit fraud, it's in. It's quite rare to see any other types of cases on advice and assistance. And the upper cost limit of £300, which is in the remuneration regulations. If you go above that, you've got to get prior authority. You see very few IMVA claims. Most firms have a few dotted around. If you're a firm who has a lot, then I would expect that to attract a fair bit of attention from contract managers, because historically they've been quite good area for gaining recoupments in. Lots of errors made in those files. Police stations, fairly obvious. You've got to have a DSCC reference number. If you're claiming telephone advice only, an area of contention, I think, is the contract says you must speak to your client to claim the fee. The LAA say you must speak to your client and give them advice and record the advice. I helped one of your firms recently who's actually just appealed that because they've not recorded the advice, but they've recorded the fact that they've spoken to the client. So we need to wait and see what comes of that. But it's clause 9115 of the contract, which is noted in there. The contract doesn't actually say you've got to record advice. But by and large, you're going to be giving advice, whether it's telephone or police station. I would always say best practice is just to record that and make sure it's just a non-issue. Need to evidence the 45-minute rule for contact to the client and for attendance.
So just on that, there's a huge problem with police stations just answering the phone anymore.
Is there?
We've been far too busy, apparently, to ever go and get your client out of the cell.
Right.
We've had cases where in entire weekend we've had 6 or 7 or 8 arrests and not managed to speak to a single client on my phone. I mean, we're writing down no custody too busy and
Yeah.
stuff, but I'd be surprised if we made that in half the cases. I mean, that's the entirely different.
But that's fine. I mean, the requirement is that if you don't meet the 45-minute rule, that you justify it on the file. And as terrible as that is, it's not your problem. That you're justifying it. Yeah, that's fine.
Sorry, isn't the rule to make contact with the station? It's not to make contact with the client.
Well, yes, it's to make contact, to call back, because quite often your police might say they're drunk in the cell, don't ring back till 8 in the morning. That's absolutely fine. Just note that on the file.
Our contract manager on that point, 45-minute contract rule, said that he liked the fact that we wrote on their client who was too drunk to speak to. So as long as we justified that we'd tried, they were happy with the...
Absolutely, yeah.
But they are effectively requiring you, though, to speak to your client if you can.
No, they're asking you to note, they're saying try to contact your client in 45 minutes. If you can't do it, write the reason down why you can't do it.
What the contract says is contact the police station, I think.
Yeah.
But because I've got a colleague who's recently had the contract manager down, they say, no, you have to actually speak to your client.
Well, no, you're going to ring the
Obviously,
station.
if there's a reason you can't, then that's fine.
Well, you think this through. If you're going to ring the station, you're going to say, I want to speak to my client. And the police are either going to say, yes, here he is, or that you can't speak to him because. So either you're in or you're out and you've got a reason why you can't speak to him, just record it and then you're through. Sorry, was there a question?
I've got a very cynical contract manager who said that it's interesting that I had so many drunk clients who couldn't speak. So it's just so other people might consider it if this particular person came with their office. That one of the things, again, you said about not picking up the phone, I had to just keep emailing custody and because they don't even answer it, first of all, to let you even set, before they even said they're too busy. So I just had this continual chain so that my 45 minutes was just way out the window because they never picked up the phone in the first place and we never had an answer phone. So it was just having that continual paper trail.
Yeah.
So that you were covered, so that, because I couldn't even satisfy the 45 minutes while I'm trying.
Yeah. But that's fine. The requirement is just to...
Yeah, exactly, yeah.
The requirement is just to justify, and in my experience, firms fall down on this more often than not just because they don't, fee earners aren't filling out the form properly, they're in a rush at the police station and they're failing to put it on. And it's the advice recorded and the timings which show the 45 minutes or the justification if not. They're the important things on the police station attendance form as far as the LAA are concerned. Separate claims guidance, fairly obvious I think, bailbacks is the same matter. If you've got 2 or more offences and there's kind of a split verdict, so one is bailed and the other one is dealt with there and then, you can claim a second fee, but that other matter has to be given further advice on, which the LAA interpret as the bailback actually happens when you go to that second interview. So you might get a, I don't know, theft and assault, the theft is bailed, the assault is NFA'd. You might continually get bailed back for 4 months by the time you've already billed the original matter. But if it never actually goes to that interview, then if your contract manager picks that, they're likely to say that should only be one matter because you've never given the further advice on that second offence.
Do you need a separate DSCC number?
No. No.
Well, we've had that on an audit and they'll pick up as a duplicate DSCC number, so you do need a separate DSCC number.
You don't. I checked this out. I mean, your contract manager will be saying that. But
I raised a query, but
Yeah,
you're
no,
not wrong.
they audit up on duplicate DSCC claims, they say you should have a separate number.
can't be under the same DSCC number.
No, because I mean you don't know at the time necessarily that you're going to be claiming.
System will reject it.
The system won't reject it because you can put multiple DSCC references in. I had to follow this up for one of my providers.
I think a lot of, in practice, a lot of actual case management systems will reject it because they'll see it.
Oh, your case management rather than the other way.
In that scenario you just mentioned, if the advice in between while he's on bail, advice was on the telephone, called you up about this new matter coming up, wanted to know about what's going to happen when he goes back on bail and so on, give you substantive advice. Does that count as advice?
I would say yes, because the contract says and further advice is given. It doesn't specify it has to be face to face. So yes, I would put that in and rely on the contract clause. I think you'd have a good case. CBAM, section 5.9 is really, really useful. And I think we've replicated the table on page 32. And that gives you lots of scenarios and when it's one matter and when is it not. The one that most providers fall down on is the example given in the fourth box, which is the bottom box on page 32. And the example is client arrested for multiple offences, irrespective of whether they are linked or not. And just to make sure the point really hits home, they've picked burglary in 2008 and rape in 1983, so nothing to do with each other. The starting point is this will be one fee. If you go into the final column, it says where two or more matters require advice on one occasion only, they should be treated as the same matter. One occasion is defined as the same continuous period of detention. So that's probably the one area in the separate matter guidance that you see more errors than anything else. Any more police station questions? Okay, court duty claims. This is something that's been identified and looked at a lot more closely than it has been in the past. 10.6, the contract specification says what you must record. You must record the date, the venue and your attendance times. A new one just recently from reports that I've heard about is you must record your lunch. If you've worked through your lunch, you must specifically state that you worked through your lunch. If you take a half-hour lunch, you must specifically state you've taken half an hour. If you don't, they'll knock an hour off your time and issue a contract notice for overclaiming. You must record your clients' names and addresses. Recently helped a firm out with David who had not recorded some of the addresses on some of their court duty claims, and the auditor had tried to recoup up the whole court duty claim for any instance where that was the case. We managed to convince them that was overkill, that not every breach of a contract is serious enough that you should recoup the funds, because obviously the person was clearly there giving advice with the clients, but the contract notice stuck for the breach. So you should be making sure that you're recording the name and address, or you're keeping those court papers which have got the name and address as part of your record. You should record what the offence type is and that the matter's in scope. That's whether your client's been produced from custody or that it's an imprisonable offence. You should record the advice given, and if you're seeing own clients, you should make it very clear that you've deducted the time from your overall claim. I've already touched on travel and disbursements. You should only be claiming disbursements where you're court duty for a Saturday or a bank holiday, or if you have left the court and you're called back, you can claim for your second journey. You must specify that you've been called back at the court's request. Make it clear that you're not simply coming back from your lunch to attend in the afternoon.
Or if you are asked to come in by the court when you're not rotated.
Yes, that would count as well.
Right. So on Saturday, bank holidays and Saturdays, you can claim your mileage, isn't it?
You can, yes.
So you claim it from your office or from where you live, residence?
It's from where you live, isn't it?
It's not just mileage, it's travel time as well.
It's travel time too, and your mileage. But it's from where you live, because you will be coming from where you live on a Saturday. That's reasonable.
So can I ask one question about disbursement side of this? Obviously it's about parking. So if you're spending parking on a weekday to court, you can claim that as a disbursement, can't you? You're expected to be able to claim parking.
For court duty? No, you can't claim any disbursement for...
So parking, someone says to do as I've done, I'm sure that I'm going to be able to claim it that.
No, you can only claim any costs associated with travel or mileage on the examples that were given before. You can't claim for it during the week. No, because what your contract managers do is when you look at your court duties, they will sort it for any disbursement claims, and any disbursement claims will look at the dates and they'll sort it for any dates that Monday, Tuesday, Wednesday, Thursday, Friday.
You can claim parking for going to court, police station, so you can't take the court duty.
No, it's the way the court duty rules are written. So if you have been doing that to prevent yourself getting a contract notice, because it's fairly minor in the grand scheme of things, I'd go through your own claims data and just do a claim amendment form before.
It's not very regular, it's not.
I know, but it's, you know, a couple of errors, contract notice, all the corrective action that you have to do, it's not worth it. That would be my advice.
One question on that. When you advise more than 6 clients, can you call in another duty solicitor from the office? That's the board system. I don't know whether it's still the case. If you're on court duty, you're only expected to do about 6 clients. Is there an upper limit on the number of
6 clients?
Yes.
I don't think so.
Beyond the 6, you can call in for another duty solicitor from the office?
I don't think so. I think you can get the court to agree to appoint a duty solicitor.
I don't think there's anything that prevents you from getting someone to come across, like if you do a morning session or
Sometimes
something.
that was the case.
Yeah, it's not something I've come across out there.
On apportioning costs, if you've got 2 files, can you put it all on one and none on the other?
Yes, but you must make it very clear, because it brings me neatly onto the next section. So travel and disbursements, I said earlier, this is an area that's attracting more and more scrutiny. Contract managers are encouraged to pick some claims on the same day, police station or whatever, to specifically check that it's been apportioned. Because the notes are not always kind of the neatest when you're looking at police station attendance forms and not always explained that well. Sometimes it can look like you've perhaps double claimed if you've apportioned it. So I'd always make it quite clear, you know, it's 24 miles to police station, I've claimed 12 on this file, 12 on the other, or I've not claimed at all on the other file. Just a quick note, yeah.
Sorry. When you speak about travel, when you speaking about travel disbursements or travel time, bearing in mind most police stations are fixed fee.
Well, in terms of police station, it's more the disbursements because the travel time is built into the fixed fee. So you can claim travel on police station, but only where you're claiming at hourly rate. So if it's perhaps gone to escape fee, you can claim up to 45 minutes.
Is the purposes of an audit travel time, for example, if travel 1 hour one way, 1 hour another way, another client case, but you put 2 hours down, is that academic? Even for a duty case as well, it's in excess of 45 minutes, just need to justify that it's only 45 minutes even though it's built into the fixed fee.
You're back to that question at the start about justification. I think for police station, doesn't it say they won't pay more than 45 minutes? So you're talking about limiting it to 45 minutes?
Well, I'm talking about fixed fee generally in terms of police station, the fact that in terms of travel, it could be in excess of 45 minutes. Are they actually bothered, or is it still the case that you need to put down a justification as to why you're over 45 minutes, irrespective of the fact that you're not getting paid for it?
I don't think that they will pay for over 45 minutes, full stop, whether it's justified or not. I'm pretty sure that's in
No,
CBAM.
they won't. It's just that if it's in excess, one if they're looking at a 45-minute rule in terms of general contract requirements.
No, I don't think so. I think that it's more from a cost perspective. So,
Just coming back on that point, clearly it's 45 minutes, but say the mileage is 120 miles one way, you put the mileage on.
yes, you would, but the higher the mileage claim, we're back to that old argument, the higher the mileage claim, the more of the justification that you need to provide. I mean, sorry, I seem to have jumped. There's a really, really good section in CBAM, section 3.9 on travel costs and disbursement costs, and it will, I don't know if I can perhaps bring very briefly, I might. No, I don't think I can turn the. I think it's 3.9.7 is the paragraph in CBAM which talks about how you justify travelling distances, and then 3.9.8 actually says the greater the distance travelled, the higher the justification needs to be. I seem to have. Sorry about this, folks. I'll just start again. Shouldn't have messed around with it. I've mentioned the maximum fee principle before as well. Sorry about that. So that's something that your contract manager will have a look at. Disbursements, contract managers are interested in maximum rates for experts. Are you recording it? Where you've got an invoice, are you recording the hourly rate, the number of hours work? Is that work broken down into things like, for example, if counsel are doing work, is it broken down into research, report writing? Really interested in more and more detail on the invoice. What I would encourage you to do, if you're never quite sure, is to have a look at that CBAM section 3.9, because it gives lots and lots of examples and lots of test cases as well about what's been allowed in the past and what hasn't.
So what's CBAM?
CBAM is a Criminal Bills Assessment Manual. It is the document which the LAA, it's the LAA's interpretation of the contract. And it's the one thing that auditors and contract managers will go to, I think, whenever there's any kind of dispute with the provider. So if you've not read it, I'd have a look at it. It's really, really interesting. It gives lots of good guidance.
Sorry, you said earlier that the LA are going to take up increasing their interest in travel disbursements.
Well, all
They're
disbursements,
cracking
really.
down on people using their private cars and parking up. That's
Yeah.
what they're doing. In Camden, which covers this area, I know someone was given an awful lot of problems in relation to it, saying you're going to Highbury Corner, there's a tube station at Euston, why don't you just jump and go 2 stops?
So it's unusual mileage
Yeah,
versus...
because if you park, for example, in Highbury or London, it's a bit ridiculously expensive. I wouldn't know what it's in Westminster where you do your extradition, but if you park in Westminster, you're talking £40 for the day, you can park that long. That's what I think they're apparently.
Yeah, no, I think you're right. I think that when you talk about more scrutiny, they're looking at the whole of the thing, travel, any sort of costs associated with travel and the disbursements. Where you've got invoices, it's about looking at the detail on the invoice. Is it broken down? If mileage is claimed by that expert, as the expert said where they've travelled from to. When it's your own mileage, it's looking at things like if you've sent somebody from Office 2 to this court, when you could have sent someone from Office 1, that might get questioned. And a lot of it is subjective, so a lot of it is down to whether you feel you're able to justify it and having that conversation with your contract manager.
I was just wondering, that's going to go whether mileage public transport thing. Obviously with oyster fares changing and day captains, whether they're now going to start to look at those kind of things in tax, whether they want to reach that level of it.
It's a possibility. I mean, I don't know. These things kind of evolve, and there's always like a next big area. I think somebody perhaps starts looking at it and says, hey, I've started looking at this and I've recouped X thousands of pounds by doing this. And then it kind of spreads around the organisation bit by bit, and that's how things work. So we've only got 2 or 3 slides left. Are there a lot of prison law providers here? Just the 1, 2? Appeals and reviews? Okay, we'll not bore everybody else then. If you two just want to, if you want to go through any of that, just come up at the end and we'll maybe just go through that. The last couple of slides now then. Production of files for audit. This is quite a big one, and this goes back to that infamous provider who was making up clients. Used to be, contract manager would say, I want these 15 files, you say, can't find one. Would say, no bother, we'll substitute another one. Those days are gone. I think now, if you can't find a file, the contract manager will then undertake further investigations. So, well, okay, here's another list of 15 files, can you produce them? And if you can't produce 1 or 2 of them, you're into even further investigations as to why you can't produce those files. My advice to you is always try to reconstitute the file to your best ability. Even if you can't get enough bits of paper to justify the fee, as long as you can get enough bits of paper to justify that your client actually exists and you went to see them, then you might have to face a recoupment on the file, but it takes away that element of whether something funny is going on in your firm, which is much more serious. Very miscellaneous. We haven't gone into details on this, but these areas are covered in your handout pack. So your contract manager may look at some of the other claim codes. We've covered the main ones, but things like your early cover, your PROT, your PROP, T&U, your means fee completion forms. Most contract managers will pick the odd one, just check you're putting the right code against the claim, making sure you're staying within the prescribed limits. Late billing is something that you're very rarely penalised for in financial terms. So if you are submitting your cases after 3 months on a regular basis, you're likely to get a rap over the knuckles, but not a recoupment. The only time I can think about that they would actually recoup files if they're consistently coming out to you and saying, you know, over 50% of your files are consistently being billed late. We're going to finally have to do something punitive to make you sit up and take notice. I can't remember anyone having files reduced for late billing for years now.
Do you know if there's a specific tolerance on this? Years ago, I remember being told it's about 5%.
It's really high. Yeah, I mean, you have to be like lots and lots of your files, and they've told you twice, and you're just not listening to them, so I wouldn't worry about it.
So just technically speaking, on the late billing aspect, it's just, I'm using a rough example. Let's say somebody's found a file and it's a year old, for whatever reason.
Bill it.
Still bill it.
Yeah. Unless, you know, like I said, unless it's like a significant problem across all of your files over a long period of time, you're not going to face a recoupment. Technically, you can receive a contract notice on it, and that sort of comes under the next bullet point, recording of other claims information. So there's the less important information, things like your endpoint codes, the stuff that if perhaps recording your UFN correctly. Technically, if you get it wrong, it can be a contract notice. Most contract managers wouldn't go there, they'll just raise it as an observation, a bit like the late billing, because it's not as important. But there is a kind of theory that things like your outcome codes, because your contract manager will use those outcome codes to help pick the files they want to target your visit, it is important to them that you're accurate. So if you're starting to make lots of errors on those, ultimately you may receive a contract notice because your CM wants to see the correct data so they can target the files which might be being billed incorrectly. We've also got virtual court claims down there. Now that's done through advocacy assistance. And that brings us neatly to our last slide. Has anyone done advocacy assistance at a virtual court? No. Okay. If one comes up, you basically get a CRIM 3 signed rather than a CRIM 2, but you sign it. And you can only claim that if there's no other representation. If it goes on and you represent them in another way, then you wrap up the costs of the virtual court work into the rep order. The advocacy assistance cases are the PROC cases. Now, in my time, whenever I saw a PROC, I nearly always selected it, and it was nearly always wrong. It was a magistrate's court fee that had been claimed incorrectly. Because of very limited circumstances, aside from virtual court, it's warrant of further detention, it's armed forces custody hearing, or it's variation of pre-charge bail conditions. Now, the only circumstances you should be using it for crime lower. Now, the upcoming change to the Policing and Crime Act at the start of April, this new rule about only 28 days for bail, is likely to see that variation of pre-charge bail conditions being used much more than it has in the past. We understand from the Legal Aid Agency that's how they anticipate funding that work, and they're likely to issue guidance to you before that act comes into force in April. The other area that you do advocacy assistant is obviously prison law parole board or disciplinary hearings. So
Can you talk about the advocacy assistance? It's claim set on the spreadsheet, I understand it's got a set fee, is that right?
No, it's paid at hourly rates. So if you are, because when I went out, 99% of PROC claims should have been like PROK and they've just been keyed in incorrectly. But they could have because they were paid at hourly rates rather than standard fee, you quite often got to a position where it didn't make a difference because someone claiming the magistrate's court fee would write in the fee that they should have claimed correctly. So
do you have a choice of what you can do? So say you submit legal aid and dealt with that in, you have to claim that under the CR3.
What for the...
Say you have to apply a period of virtually, you apply for legal aid, it's dealt with in one hearing, you have to claim a fixed fee, you claim on legal aid.
I think if it's dealt with there and then at the virtual court and there's no other representation, you would just claim the advocacy assistance work. That's the idea, because generally it would be cheaper, wouldn't it? Yeah, that's what the LAA would do. That brings us to an end. So, I mean, if the prison law and appeals reviews want to come up and we'll go through it for 5 minutes, that's fine, unless anyone has any other questions.